Kurt, so for this episode for PBT Extra, we just have to go right in. Let's just go straight to the history-making moment in Madison Square Garden, no less. Steph Curry hits his 2,974th three to become the all-time leader in the NBA. What was your reaction to that historic moment in the Garden?
It felt like a coronation, didn't it? Like we've known for how many years have you and I and everybody who follows basketball said, yeah, Steph Curry's the best shooter ever, right? Like there's not some great surprise here. We knew this was coming. The question was like the record books have just kind of caught up with what we already knew, which is that he's the greatest shooter ever. I thought, it sort of felt like that moment. And I'm glad it kind of happened at MSG, not just to rub the salt in the wounds of the Knicks fans who weren't able to draft him back in 2009, but also just nothing against Indiana, but that's a big stage. And you wanted this to either happen at home for him or on a big stage. I was excited. But when you were watching the game, what did you think?
The awards music came on the broadcast. I mean, it was like immediate timeout or something. Everything stopped. There was a standing ovation. He was able to spend time with Coach Steve Kerr, who was a great shooter himself, right? Yeah. Give him the record-breaking ball. He gave that ball to his dad on the court, had a moment with Ray Allen, who was there. Reggie Miller was on the call. And at the end of the game, Steph Curry got the jersey that says Curry 2009-74, right? On the back there. He was given that jersey by Ray and Reggie. And he said, look, these guys are icons. I grew up watching them. Ray, when he passed Reggie's record, that was a big moment for me. I remember watching that. So it's like the whole thing just came, it was beautifully done. And I thought it was very important, Kurt, because in basketball, it's one of the games in my mind that really prioritize history. Like you always see the legends getting props at all the NBA All-Star games. Mr. Bill Russell is not Bill Russell, it's Mr. Russell. Yeah. That's just part of the game. That's just part of basketball. So having Steph Curry share that moment with two guys who know what it's like and who just willingly passed that throne and celebrated that instead of trying to make it about themselves. I thought that was really special.
And the respect was there, which, not always in sports do you see guys kind of happy to see their marks go down, right? But in this case, they're like, you know what? We respect how Steph Curry got here. I think they respect his work ethic. He's got a lot in common with Ray Allen. I remember after his first title, I had gone to a sponsored event for a sponsor of his with a chance to talk to Steph Curry one-on-one, and it was a golf-related event. And if you talk to him about golf or basketball, he loves the process. He loves, and Ray Allen was very much, Ray Allen's almost OCD about stuff. Curry was very much that way. Yes, obviously natural skill. Obviously kind of grew up in a family with, dad was an amazing shooter, right? But Curry puts in the hours. He loves the process. He loves working on that, little hop to the right, jump three that he's got. You know how many of those he's taken in a gym to get ready for those moments? The pull-up threes. He loves that process. He loves to go through that kind of work. And you don't get to be where he is without that kind of love of process. I think it's why golf works for him too, right? It's the same mental concept, isn't it? You've got to hit thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands of balls to get your short game, right? To get your 9-iron where you want it, let alone.
And it can still be elusive.
Exactly. I think shooting can be the same way. So I think he enjoys that process.
Yeah, Reggie Miller, and before the game, Reggie and Ray were talking about that and said, look, I like talking to guys like Ray and Steph because they know what it feels like to get to the gym early, with the keys. When it's still dark outside and it's just you in the gym, you're sweeping the floor beforehand to get 1,000 or 2,000 shots, a day. And it's not like 1,000 shots, it's 1,000 makes. That's what they mean by that. Yeah. And that kind of dedication to the craft is admirable. Maybe for 1 year, maybe for 2 years, for 10 years, for 20 years. When you think about that kind of dedication without the results that you're talking about, remember there was a time when no one knew who Steph Curry was at Davidson, right? And that's what's so crazy. And I love what he said in his comments post game. He said, "I've had crazy faith, my whole life." And that's what shooters have to have is, you have to believe you're the best shooter ever in order to become the best shooter ever. It's just, it's one of the coolest things. And I'm just thrilled for him and his family. I'm happy that he actually got to share that moment with his mom and dad as well in the Garden.
Absolutely. It's been amazing. And remember the other part of his career, those first couple of years when he was having real ankle issues, there were legitimate questions about, I mean, he had to rework his shot and how he lands on his jumper. Like there was a lot of work that went into just rehabbing that. And he got that first contract, his first extension of his rookie contract wasn't for near the max. It was a big contract. And we wrote at the time, like, it's a bit of a gamble. It's either going to be the best contract in history because he's going to live up to his potential, or you're going to regret it because he never got healthy. And fortunately for all of us, he's orthotics, reworking how he lands, the work he's put in physically to be right has got him here too.
Yeah, fortunately for all of us, that's a true statement. When you think about transcendental stars of the game of basketball, Steph Curry has to be on a short list of players, who captured the imagination of an entire generation. That's a very short list, Kurt. I mean, when you think about players who have changed the game, that's a little bit of a longer list. But players who have captured the imagination of everyone, that's a whole different level. And what's very interesting too, and we could spend time on this if you find it interesting, is how Ray Allen was saying that shooting is very subjective. And going into this record, it was like this 3-day buildup. And like you said, we knew that Steph Curry's, one of the greatest, if not the greatest shooter to ever play basketball. But hearing shooters talk about shooting, it's different. They're like, okay, well, who's the best shooter on a one dribble pull up? Who's the best open, shooter in open space? Who's the best shooter, trying to get a shot off, creating their own shot? Like there are so many different elements of shooting that make it a science, and more of an art than a science. And I thought that comment by Reggie Miller was really, really interesting, especially when you're talking about who's the greatest shooter in the record books, versus who's the greatest shooter to ever live. It's a little more complicated.
It is. I think what makes Curry special is that he can shoot off the bounce, that he can shoot off the catch. Like most guys are better at one than the other, and he's really, really good at both. I mean, would you put him in the GOAT conversation? I mean, that's one of the things that's come up, and it's an interesting conversation. Would you have him in there?
No. But I think that I think the greatest of all time conversation is like that. That's, to me, that is a different conversation. We're talking about the greatest shooter of all time. I think right now, let's just focus on the amazing award and achievement. And, he has a resume that is truly like, it's incredible. But I think when we talk about the GOAT leap, let's wait until everything's said and done. I don't like how we talk about greatest of all time when people are still playing.
Yeah. I think there's something to that. And
not fair.
Where he ranks now and where he ranks when he's done playing. And maybe he ends up, we'll see where he ends up. Maybe he ends up on that second tier and he's, only as good as Bird and Shaq and whatever else you're going to put on that. Like, to me, like, he is in the pantheons of conversation, however this lands, and he's earned that spot.
I mean, he's one of the 75 greatest basketball players to ever play the game, and he's in his early 30s. So that's kind of what I mean is when you look at where Steph started versus where he is now and where he could be, like who knows what could happen, right? But So it's very exciting. It's very exciting. And I can't wait to see him continue to add on to that number. I mean, what an incredible number, 2,974, Kurt. Wow. So I want to move your attention to another team. Let's talk about the Los Angeles Lakers with their transcendental star, LeBron James. A lot has happened with this Lakers team. They seem to have struggled, and now they have more players added to the COVID-19 list. The ripple effects of COVID-19 through the entire sports world, not just the NBA right now, appear to be devastating. What's your take on this Lakers versus Mavs matchup tonight, knowing that Luka's not going to be in the game?
Yeah, it's kind of hard without Luka in the game, and the Lakers still have, at the end of the day, they still have their star. And as much as they have, how much work did they put in? Hey, we're bringing in Russell Westbrook so we can ease the burden on LeBron, and we're doing all these. They traded away, frankly, a whole roster full of good role players to get Westbrook and a whole team, basically. They got to this point. At the end of the day right now, when LeBron's on the court, they have a plus 4.2 net rating, and when he's off, it's negative 2.9. Like with everybody they got and with everything they've done, this team still hinges on LeBron. And when LeBron's playing like he has the last couple of weeks, the last 10 days. I mean, he's been phenomenal. He had that 30-point triple-double with just ridiculous block shots against Orlando. I don't know how they do against Orlando if he's not there, because they're not – Westbrook hasn't quite been there, and Anthony Davis hasn't – he's putting up numbers, but I don't think he's been the alpha that they kind of hoped he would become. That I don't think he's taken over the team in the way they want. And so it still comes back to 36, almost 37 later this month. LeBron James taking over games. That's a hard load. I mean, you've watched them. They're not an easy team to figure out, Corey.
You mentioned it, with LeBron on the court versus when LeBron's not on the court. Those are two different Lakers teams. And it's difficult because they oscillate between a very bad team and like a championship team. And it's hard to wrap your mind around that, And I think that's when we are 10 games into the season, I think it's one thing to say, okay, they'll figure it out. They're the Lakers, they have LeBron, they have Anthony Davis. They'll figure it out. Now we're about 30 games into the season, and so my question is, when does it stop? When do you have to say, okay, it's figured out? I don't think we're in panic mode yet, but I will say when LeBron's on the court, Kurt, it's just a dramatically different team. And knowing that Anthony Davis is kind of like he is the engine that this team runs through. I find that very interesting, when you see, like, without LeBron's presence, one would assume that they would still be very, very good, knowing that the entire offense goes through Anthony Davis, but that hasn't necessarily been the case. And I wonder why that is.
Yeah. I mean, Anthony Davis is still putting up numbers. He's still got 24 and 10 this year. Like, we're talking about an elite player, but I think what he lacks, well, a couple things, but like primarily what's missing from the bubble Anthony Davis that helped this team win a title is the shooting. He was a knockdown shooter in the bubble, and he's shooting 19% from three right now. That's not spacing the floor. That's not going to be quite good enough. If I can sag off Anthony Davis and dare him to shoot from the outside, I can clog the lane for LeBron and Westbrook and everybody, Horton Tucker and anybody else who wants to drive the lane. And I think that the spacing issues have been better. I will say this, just looking at the stats, I think that there's two reasons for optimism for Lakers Nation. First is simply, since LeBron came back, since the 12, well, he's played 10 of the 12, since he returned from that abdominal injury, they're actually 7th in the league in defense. They're starting to figure that end of the floor out and be better. And the other one is this: when they run lineups with Westbrook and LeBron on the floor, but Anthony Davis at center, no Dwight Howard, no, everybody, they're actually plus 10 on a net rating. They actually make that work. And I think that that's the lineup you end up seeing more in the playoffs, and they're figuring it out. So I think there's a path to them getting there still. And you talk to people around the league, nobody writes them off because it's LeBron. But Corey, how big is the gap between the Lakers right now and where Golden State and Phoenix are?
Yeah. That's kind of the big concern. That's what I mean is how can at times you're like, okay, this team has everything they need. And then at other times they look a little, discombobulated. So I don't know. The gap is daunting. But as we've seen, with LeBron knows how to peak at the right times. How many finals has he been to? He understands that process. And he has done a very good job historically bringing everyone else with him to that mountaintop. So that's why I'm hesitant. I'm always hesitant to count them out because I have seen what LeBron has put on tape. I've seen the evidence, Kurt. Not once, not twice. I've seen it multiple times. I'm like, ooh, I'm never one to be too hasty to disqualify a LeBron-led team.
No. I think we've all been burned by that one too many times, man.
Yeah, but it's interesting because tonight we'll see what this Mavericks team looks like. This is, once again, Doncic is out with ankle soreness. This is his third straight. And Dallas is in an interesting position, Kurt, trying to figure out what that future looks like and try to understand, it's another team where when Luka's on the floor, they're really good. But when Luka's not on the floor, who'll step up?
No. They did not go get a second shot creator this offseason, really. And with all due respect to Jalen Brunson, who's frankly sixth man of the year kind of play at points this year, has been really good. But they don't have if you double LeBron and he can throw the ball to, in theory, Westbrook or something, like somebody else should be able to create. It's what makes, hey, you want to go put two guys on Giannis? Chris Middleton will burn you. Brooklyn is supposed to do that with Harden. And who you do that to Dallas? I'm like, let's get the ball out of Doncic's hands. And yeah, we don't really fear anybody. No offense to Tim Hardaway's a good player. Kristaps Porzingis has never developed into a number two. I don't fear them. And without Luka tonight, without Luka for however long he's going to be out, yeah, I don't fear their offense. I don't fear their shot creation. They're not a great defensive team that can stay in games. I mean, these are still pros. Don't get me wrong, but night in and night out, I don't fear them, especially if LeBron decides to turn it on. What are they going to do?
The league has been asking that question for 2 decades, Kurt. Like, what are you going to do when LeBron decides to go off? Now, you mentioned Brooklyn. I want to take your attention there. So Brooklyn currently has one of their superstars, James Harden, and 6 other players in COVID-19 protocols. There was a moment at which point it's like, how are they going to field the team? They have like 8 available players, Kurt. And just, I was curious from just how creative you have to be from a GM perspective, looking for exemptions, trying to get as creative as you can to put out a roster to still buoy the team in the Eastern Conference. It's not like you can just say, okay, we're just gonna put some players out there and hope for the best. This is the NBA, any given night, right? So I'm curious to hear your perspective on how Brooklyn navigates this attrition due to COVID-19.
They're not the only team dealing with this. I mean, the Bulls have had games canceled. The Lakers were without 3 guys. A lot of teams. As of us talking, there are 35 NBA players in COVID protocols. That's not counting Rick Carlisle, the Indiana Pacers coach, Alvin Gentry, the Kings coach, a host of assistants, and on down the line. The Raptors play-by-play guys had to like that. Like, it's been going through the league, and it's not just the league, right? I mean, this is where we are kind of as a nation right now, right? We're all kind of dealing with this. So, look, the Nets they signed Langston Galloway. You can sign to get around this short term. You can actually sign what's called a hardship case, where situations beyond your control like this allow a GM to sign someone to it's not a 10-day contract. It sort of works like a 10-day contract. We can bring somebody in at the minimum. A bunch of teams may have to do that and pull some guys out of the G League for a little while just to field a roster. And Corey, winter's here. Christmas is coming. New Year's is coming, where people are indoors with family, indoors celebrating with friends. Is it just me? Do you think this could get worse before it gets better?
Well, I mean, the past week and a half, I think, is indicative that it's probably going to get worse. You look at the NFL, right, where the Rams had all those players sitting out on the COVID-19 list, and the NFL is experiencing very similar things going into their postseason in a few weeks. So it's interesting to me, because what you have here is 2 different parallel case studies, right, where you can kind of look at how does the NFL monitor this going into their postseason, which should wrap up right in early February, and then the NBA can then try to figure out what that looks like, in a worst case scenario come May and June. So I think that's going to be an interesting kind of learning just in real time. But yeah, you're right. I would be concerned because it does not look like it's getting better at the current moment.
No. And by the way, it's not just these 2 leagues. I mean, the NHL has real problems right now with especially with international travel. The Premier League had to postpone a Manchester United game. Like, it's a worldwide kind of rise and issue right now. And I can say that the league is hoping they don't want to go back to some of the protocols they've put in the past. They would prefer to avoid that. And that all has to be negotiated with the players' union anyway. But I will say, it does feel like the first couple months of the season, there was almost a sense of normalcy. And that's kind of been shattered now. We're in it again, it feels like.
So, Kurt, let's go to the Big Easy. It's not going too well for New Orleans in recent years. And now you kind of add another issue with, when is Zion going to be back? He's played in as many games nearly as he's missed, over the past couple of years. But when he does play, Kurt, man, oh man, is he one of the best players in the NBA. So if you're New Orleans, where do you go?
Well, what's interesting is where I would go. My gut instinct was, hey, they're literally last in the East, or I mean last in the West. Was, hey, yeah, don't think about crawling back up into the play-in. Like, make your moves, make decisions now, play guys now to think about longer term, to think about, hey, where can we be next year? How can we make this team better? The buzz and news out of New Orleans is the opposite. They are going to try to take a swing to get somebody to win now so that they can move up into the play-in this year, that they don't want to wait, that Zion doesn't want to wait.
They're 8-21, Kurt.
Man, I hear you. I'm just telling you, that's not what the buzz is around the league. They want to take a swing at it. We'll see. Zion, big men with foot issues it's concerning. Like, that's just a concerning thing, especially where he has the Jones fracture on the essentially off of the little toe. That's not an area of great blood flow to the foot, so it sometimes doesn't. It's what Embiid had. Sometimes it doesn't heal as quickly as you would hope. I don't know. I'm wondering. Them trying to take a swing at it almost feels like a GM trying to keep his job, and that rarely ends well for teams. So I don't know what's going to happen down there. I think that they've got real questions about that have to be answered ownership level down. What kind of team are they trying to build? Where are they going? Where do they want to go the rest of this year? And then I'll ask you the big one, Corey. Zion Williamson is extension eligible this offseason. Like, are you going to offer him a max rookie extension?
I would think there is a very strong case for it. The only concern that we have is exactly what we were talking about before with Steph Curry, right? If you sign him and he's injured, then that doesn't go out too well. But if you sign him and he's healthy, you have the tape, you know what he can do. There are no answers for Zion. Like, it's just no. He's dominant. So if he can stay healthy, it's not a guarantee, because nothing's guaranteed, but it's a fairly safe bet. Right. This is not like one of those questions. I think you look at a similar rookie extension that we talked about with DeAndre Ayton, right? You had one really phenomenal season, a few where you didn't really live up to potential, but you're trending in the right direction. Where do you go as a franchise? You want to be a little more cautious. But with Zion, it's one of those things where he's a franchise player right off the bat. You know that he's one of the best players in the NBA. The only question is, how many games will he be available, right? So I think from my perspective, that's a bet that I would be willing to make as a franchise. But understanding that, then how do you build around that? And I think New Orleans has had, and I would like to hear your thoughts before I go into this next point. So from your perspective, where do you land on that question?
I'm with you. I think you have to. Like, talent like his doesn't come along. You're making the Joel Embiid bet, essentially. Hey, Joel Embiid played one of his first 3 years, 31 games. They gave him backed up the Brinks truck. It's worked out. He got healthy. He got right. I think that's ultimately what you're hoping, that Zion gets healthy, becomes really committed to everything, and then you put the right pieces around him. And look, Philadelphia was first place in the East last year, and they are a threat this year. Well, we don't want to go down that road, but like, as long as Joel Embiid is healthy, like, they are a threat. I think that that's kind of where you're hoping to get with Zion, but you're making a bet. You are definitely rolling the dice that he can be healthy and want to do this.
And I think, Kurt, you have to understand too, is that like every franchise in every scenario is making a bet. You're going to roll a dice because you got to pay someone franchise money, So if you're going to pay someone franchise money and someone has to be the face of the team, this is my argument. It's like, okay, well, Zion's one of the best players in the NBA, when he's healthy. And the question is, how can he stay healthy? Can he correct that? There have been other players, as you've mentioned, the list that we just went through. There have been other players who figured it out and then took their teams to the top. I mean, if you're going to pay that much money to somebody who is, that you don't necessarily know what you're going to get, to me, it's kind of like, you're going to pay someone that money.
Yeah.
So
I think some of the concerns about him too, and I think this applies to Doncic as well, where we've been questions about his conditioning and weight. Like, dude's 22. Like, there's a lot of guys who come into the league and, hey man, dinner can be a whole pizza and 2 liters of Coke, and I can go out tomorrow and play. Especially at if you're dominant in college, like, you could get away with that. that doesn't fly is your body starts to age, right? And guys kind of 22, 23, 3-4 years in the league is often when you see guys kind of adapt and adjust. Like, hey, I got to watch what I eat. I got to be a little careful about when I go out and how and guys continue to do that as they go through, with even older, like Draymond talking about it recently and Chris Paul going vegan a couple of years ago and stuff. I think you see guys evolve. I think that's what the other thing you're hoping for with Zion is that it kicks in, right? That he kind of reaches a point where, he's okay with he's okay hiring a chef and keeping it in tight,
It's funny because when you look at, like you said, the jump to what does it mean to be a professional? I think that's a very fascinating question, in a professional sports league where a guy like Anthony Davis, I think, learned a lot from LeBron James, and he said as much, right? I mean, when you learn like how LeBron prepares and how he treats the game, that teaches you a lot, right? And as a young, talented player like Zion, I think he'd benefit greatly by having, an older person like that can teach him the ropes. That's one thing I do like a lot about how Miami has Udonis Haslem, right? Like to teach the younger guys, like this is what it is to be a Miami Heat player, to be a pro in the league. Because I do think, I think that's a very valuable role. I think it's an extremely valuable role. Now, one thing I do want to talk about with New Orleans, though, it seems like we're always kind of talking about them in this context, doesn't it, Kurt? It's like,
yes,
you had Chris Paul, you had Anthony Davis, you had Brandon Ingram, who became your most improved player, and then now, one of the better players in the NBA, and then you draft Zion, then you fire Coach Van Gundy. It's like, it seems like we're always in this question of, is it a rebuild? What's happening? Why is that with New Orleans?
It almost feels like they're always impatient. Like, oh, hey, Zion's really good. Let's get some guys to do this now, rather than what we saw in Golden State, where hey, we'll take our time. And eventually we're going to have to bring in Andre Iguodala and, the role players, the Bogut and Livingston and all these guys they brought in to put around Curry and Clay and Draymond, but they gave those guys time. The best teams are able to really develop players over time and multiple players. And we've never really seen that. Part of that might be misses on drafts, but part of that is just there always seems to be we got to do this fast, impatience there. And it leads to less than ideal decisions and just guys not quite fitting the same way as they'd hoped. And it sort of feels like that again. We said this earlier, you and I were talking, you're like, I feel like I've seen this movie. And that's what worries me if I'm a Pelicans fan, is that it is hard enough to sell that team in New Orleans, which, by the way, remains maybe my favorite city in the United States. I love New Orleans. But if you go into any bar in New Orleans, it's Saints gear everywhere. That's Saints number one, and then college football number two. Like, it's a football area, and you've got to really sell the Pelicans. And Zion brought a real buzz, and it feels like that momentum is gone, doesn't it?
Man, I'm excited to see what will happen here, because it does seem like we're in a critical moment where the future of the franchise may be determined yet again. And like it's very interesting to see this play out once again in real time, Kurt.
Yeah, it's hard to watch. I feel bad for Pelicans fans, but we'll see what happens. Hopefully we still get to see Zion this year. I would hate the idea of him not playing this season.